This is Will Stewart from OnlineChessLessons.net, and today I'm going to be covering a game in response to a multiple request from ChessGames.com to cover a game from the 2003 Dos Hermanas Internet Blitz Tournament event, a game between Hikaru Nakamura, who I believe at the time was around 2600, 2650, and Life Master A.J. Goldsby. And so Nakamura already, this was in 2003, he was already starting to dominate the blitz world, especially online. So he opens with d4, and Goldsby takes play into a Nimzo Indian. Well, looks like a Nimzo Indian with this, an e6 and knight f6. And with knight f3, it's kind of like Nakamura's more or less sidestepping it. So d5 seems to be the principled response by black here. And so obviously the idea to inhibit white from playing e4 and really taking over the center. So knight c3, and white is just continuing development. And so now with the move c6, this is going into the Slav. So I believe playing c5 here for black, this is going to lead to a Tarash and very balanced positions here. And there's a ton of moves that black can play here, but c6 really seems to be the most popular these days. And so now with e3, there's a couple of lines. I believe going into bishop g5 can lead to very, very complicated play, namely the Botvinnik variation, among other things. And also, I think g3 is maybe a possibility here, inviting black to accept the queen's gambit pawn on c4. There's a couple of different variations. Maybe you can play queen c2 if you like. So pretty early in the game. And so now e3 seems to be the most popular line for white, and with knight bd7, so now it's a Slav, and now with taking, I believe this becomes a semi-Slav now by taking the pawn and opening up the position. And so the idea is simply that black, he's making it easy for white to play e4 here, but he's thinking that he's going to gain sufficient counterplay in the form of playing c5 and undermining white's center, specifically the pawn on d4. And so he also gains a tempo with b5. So that's kind of the idea, is by he waited until white moved the bishop on f1. You know, if white plays bishop d2, well, then it doesn't make as much sense to take because white hasn't moved that bishop on f1. So by moving, now he takes to gain a tempo, and by playing b5, so white is getting pushed back a little bit, and now a6, and the idea is to prepare bishop b7 and c5. So I really like this line. I believe it's called the Meran now. The Meran is characterized by the bishop on b7, this pawn structure, and playing c5 to gain space. And I like it for black because it's very dynamic, and it gives great chances of counterplay and opening the game up. So now castles by white. Maybe a little more aggressive to go ahead and play e4 and push the pawn up, but castle's definitely a good move. Get the king out of the center. And so now with c5, black is opening the game up, and he's preparing to, he's trying to play more actively on the queen side than worry about his king safety, because every tempo matters in these types of positions. White is intending to simply play e4 and e5, and it's going to be kind of tough for black to, he's going to be defending here, so he wants to play actively in the center and worry about his king a little bit later. Also, castling early is going to give white a specific target to attack, in the form of knowing exactly where the black king is going to be. So maybe holding off on castling makes it a little more difficult for white to exactly pinpoint a focal point for his attack. So with e4, white is threatening d5, which occurs in some lines in this Meran. It gets very complicated. He's also threatening e5, which is going to open up the e4 square for his pieces. And so black takes, and now knight takes. And, just a note here. If black plays e5, yes, he does gain a tempo, but in this type of position, the advantage is definitely going to be with white. I mean, he's got the d5 square, f5 square. If black plays g6, it's going to weaken this knight on f6, maybe bring the bishop out. So, black doesn't want to play e5. And so what does he want to do? Well, he wants to create counterplay. He needs to put some pressure on white's position because white is threatening to gain space with moves like e5, possibly f4 in the future. So probably black wants to play bishop b7, maybe moves like queen b6 to put pressure on the center, and possibly bishop d6. So his counterplay is going to come in the form of putting the bishops and the queen around these diagonals to attack white's position from the side. And so with bishop b7, obviously white can't play e5 quite yet. So queen e2, go ahead and get the queen. I like queen e2 a lot more than rook e1 because queen e2, maybe this rook is going to be better placed on d1. And so it certainly would appear, the rooks can put some pressure on that queen on d8. Pressure in the form of this X-ray here on the d file. And if the queen goes to c7 or something, rook c1 is also going to keep chasing it and developing with tempo. So that's basically what's going on. So bishop c5 wants to put some pressure on white and also inhibit the move f4 by go ahead and seizing this diagonal. And so now Black is kind of getting a little cramped up here. I mean, I like the piece play so far, and it's definitely seems like maybe white has a very small advantage, but not a great advantage yet. It seems a pretty balanced game in that Black has achieved the counterplay with the bishops on the diagonals, and white is ready to go ahead and play e5. So with h6, this is a questionable move to me. I think maybe it was a little better to maybe play queen c8, possibly queen b6, possibly rook c8. H6 now Black has to continue playing actively because white, if not, white is just going to throw the pawns at him, and he's really going to get in the position. It's really going to gain a lot of space. And so Black plays h6 here because he doesn't want to run into bishop to g5. But on the flip side, why not just develop the queen away from that? It seems to me a little more natural. So h6, maybe a little too defensive. And so now with rook d1, so white is really starting to heat up with the development in the center and a couple of nasty threats coming along his diagonal. Not to mention he's got some potential ideas of putting the knight on d5. Just potential ideas. So with queen b6, okay, so queen b6, so why play h6? To prevent bishop g5. If you're just going to move the queen away from the diagonal, anyway. So, I think this was a blitz game, so you don't want to be too critical on the players. But Dos Hermanas is, I think it's the biggest online blitz tournament in the world. So, continuing e5. So, white's gaining a lot of space. Obviously, this d6 square is going to be a source of concern for black. And so now, knight d5 is really the only move to consider. Alternatives being knight h5, knight g4, not really doing much. So, knight d5, and so now knight e4 doesn't get much more. It doesn't get easier as far as picking out a move. And so now what's going on in the position? Well, Black didn't want to allow white to exchange his dark square bishop because that hole on d6 would become very weak. Not to mention, it just seems too easy for white. I mean, he's going to reroute the knight, reroute to e4, and put the knight on d6 anyway. So bishop e7, preserving the dark square bishop to protect this square specifically. And now a very typical undermining move in these types of positions, just trying to gain some space, trying to gain some squares, create some weaknesses on the queen side. And so obviously now white is threatening to win a pawn simply with a takes b5 if black castles. So Black more or less, he doesn't want to take this. You don't really want to take that pawn because now white is going to have a weakness to attack on a6. Black is going to have the weakness on a6, and it's just kind of making it easier for white. Not to mention, the rook on the 4th rank definitely has some ideas to swing over to the king side. Let's say castles. And maybe if Nakamura is feeling real crazy here, he can play knight f6 and just immediately try to sack the house and go after black. So definitely, the rook on the 4th rank is very dynamic. So a4, I like the move, and so b4 it's more or less forced. It's very difficult to defend and keep the pawn on b5. And so now a5, and so black is this pawn is a little bit stranded on b4, but it's got defenders, and the knight on d5 is extremely strong for black. Definitely his best piece here. But in compensation, white has achieved it's definitely a definite space advantage in the form of his pawns on e5 and a5, and black's queen is a little misplaced on a7. So black's queen being misplaced is kind of a theme in this game. So with knight d6. King f8 is not a very good move. I mean, the knight is just way too comfortable. Not to mention just taking and queen takes, and white is going to have an indisputable advantage here. So you got to challenge it, and you got to take it for black. So bishop takes d6, and maybe it looks like, okay, so white is sacking a pawn here to open lines against the black king. And it's going to be very difficult, especially when white is playing moves like knight d4. So let's say black tried to go ahead and castle here. Well, that's probably going to run into just maybe speculation. Knight takes e6 is definitely an idea. You know, maybe even bishop takes h6. You see some ideas in these tactics, in these types of positions. Now, I mean, it's like, you know, queen g4 check, throwing a little check, and it would seem that due to, you know, black's queen is way out of play, and it's tough for him to coordinate these knights into a good defense. Seems like white's going to be crushing. So that's just an idea what would happen if castles. Bishop takes h6, just for example. So there's a lot of sacks hanging in there. Knight takes e6, queen e4 maybe. And so black, he tries to consolidate his position before castling, which makes sense. You want to get the queen in to help defend against any attack. And now Nakamura just absolutely kills it. I mean, knight f5, so double attacking the queen on d6 and pawn on g7. And I think here it was time for black to give the pawn back with queen e5, but it doesn't work. It just, you know, this is the first idea I had, but after queen takes, knight takes, and check, maybe king d7, knight takes, and white, it looks to me like black manages to get the piece back. Now, he is going to lose a pawn, maybe more, after moves. I mean, this seemed to me to be black's best chance. Not something you really want to play, especially when you maybe run into ideas like this. That's an idea. Maybe just take the pawn. You know, white is definitely better here, but maybe black can hold it. But after the move played in the game, queen f8, which I think was just too much, black is trying too hard to hold on to these pawns. And so now Nakamura just bishop c4 plays, you know, a very good move. You know, bishop e4 looks nice, but there's no, you know, I like maintaining the pin. And not to mention, bishop c4 sets up some ideas of sacrificing on e6. So it seemed to essentially force knight 7 to f6 with bishop c4. And now Nakamura just uncorks a bomb, bishop f4. And when I was looking at the game, I was like, I know it's a blitz game, but I mean, this is a little bit too much. But, you know, I mean, it just makes sense. I mean, okay, you know, what's lacking in white's position here? He can't develop this bishop. Well, it looks like, you know, he can't. And he wants to develop this rook to the c-file. So, okay, bishop f4. So, I mean, it logically makes sense. I mean, white has sacrificed a pawn to open up lines to black's king, specifically the e, the d-file, and also the c-file could be open as well. And, you know, as he has sacrificed a pawn, he's achieved dynamic play. He's got the two bishops. All of his pieces are starting to attack, very coordinated. Moves like this should be possible. Just logically, they should make sense. And the tactical refutation of knight takes f4, very simple. Just bishop b5 check. There's no way to block, and this is just leading to mate. Very simple. So that's that. So g6. It's pretty tough to recommend moves here for black. G6, and now knight d6 check, and white just wins a piece. Maybe he's got some ideas of trapping that, but it's gonna be pretty tough. So king c6, and now a little bit too late to trap the knight. And after bishop takes a6, here Goldsby resigned with black because I mean white is just threatening mate on the move, and you know rook takes a6 after check, and I mean, you know, white can win it however he wants. I mean, rook c1, for example, maybe queen b5, whatever. So after bishop takes a6, black resigned, Goldsby resigned, and Nakamura. What a fantastic game! Great victory, very characteristic of his style. Even though this game was played in 2003, just sharp, aggressive, dynamic play, putting the pressure on his opponent from move one. So a great game by Nakamura, and this is Will Stewart from OnlineChessLessons.net, and thanks for listening.